One night around 10 p.m., I was taking a shower before bed. The bathroom was small, a utilitarian space with white tiles and a frosted glass shower door. It was the kind of shower door that blurs everything behind it, creating a hazy, otherworldly effect. As I lathered my hair, I glanced towards the bathroom door, my eyes caught by a sudden movement. My first thought was a stray cat, a common visitor in our neighborhood. We lived on the edge of a wooded area, and stray cats often wandered onto our property. But this movement wasn't the flitting of a feline. It was more deliberate, more human. Through the hazy, frosted surface, I saw a shape. A hand, dark and solid against the white tiles, reaching towards the light switch. It was completely dark, and that immediately freaked me out. My family is fair-skinned, with no one even remotely close to the complexion of this hand. What scared me even more was how the hand seemed to be coming through the door, or at least at an angle where I should have been able to see the rest of the person. But I couldn't. The bathroom was small, and the door was only a few feet away. I should have been able to see at least a glimpse of an arm, a shoulder, anything. But there was nothing. Just the hand, reaching out with an unnatural, unsettling grace. It hit the light switch, and the room plunged into darkness. No sound. No struggle. Just the snap of the switch, the sudden, suffocating darkness, and the absolute silence. There I was, standing in the shower, completely in the dark, having just seen what seemed like a phantom hand. The only noise around me was the sound of water hitting the floor, and I was paralyzed with fear. It wasn't a rational fear, a fear based on logic or understanding. It was something more primal, more visceral. It was the kind of fear that makes your blood run cold, the kind that makes your heart pound in your chest until it feels like it will burst. Somehow, I mustered the courage to leave the shower. I felt the cold air on my skin, a stark contrast to the hot spray of water that had just been enveloping me. The darkness seemed to press down on me, suffocating me with its weight. I fumbled for the towel, feeling along the edge of the bathtub, my hand brushing against the smooth, cold porcelain. I wrapped myself in the towel, trembling as I felt my way to the light switch. My fingertips found the switch, and with a flick of my wrist, the bathroom was bathed in a soft, warm light. The wave of relief was overwhelming. It was as if my body had been holding its breath for an eternity, and now it could finally exhale. I stood there, my heart still hammering in my chest, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. It was as if I had just escaped from some unseen predator. I checked everywhere. The stairs leading up to my bathroom are old and creaky. I would have heard if someone came and went. I cautiously peered into the hallway, the bedroom, and into the other rooms of the house. The silence was deafening. No one was there. I stood there for a long time, clinging to the light switch, feeling the cold porcelain beneath my fingers. I wanted to believe it was a trick of my mind, a misinterpretation of shadows or a figment of my imagination. But I knew deep down that it wasn't. I had seen it, felt it. The hand, the darkness, the sudden, chilling silence. Strangely, nothing like this has ever happened again. I've never seen the hand, heard the sound of the switch, or felt that chilling darkness again. I've tried to explain it away, attributing it to stress, a lack of sleep, or maybe even just a power surge. But the truth is, I still don't know what it was, or who it was. The memory of that night still haunts me. Every time I step into the shower, I glance towards the door, expecting to see that hand, that dark shape against the frosted glass. I'm not sure if I'm waiting for it to return, or if I'm hoping it won't. The experience left an indelible mark on me. It was a stark reminder of the fragility of reality, of the unseen forces that can both frighten and fascinate us. It was a glimpse into the shadows, a glimpse into the unknown. Over the years, I've tried to understand it, to rationalize it. I've read about sleep paralysis, about sleepwalking, about ghost stories and urban legends. But nothing has explained it fully. It remains a mystery, a chilling memory that I can't shake off. I've told the story to others, but few believe me. Some dismissed it as an overactive imagination, others suggested it was a ghost, a poltergeist, or some other supernatural entity. I can't say for sure what it was, but I know what I saw, and I know it was real. I've lived with this experience for years, and it has shaped me in ways I never could have imagined. It has made me more aware of the world around me, more sensitive to the unseen forces that shape our lives. It has made me more open to the possibility of the unknown, of the things that lie beyond our understanding. Sometimes, when I'm alone in the darkness, I hear a faint noise, a click, a rustle, and I catch my breath. I look around, my heart pounding, expecting to see that dark hand reaching through the frosted glass, but it's never there. I know I'll never be able to explain it, to understand it fully. But I know it happened, and I know that it changed me. It made me more careful, more aware, and more afraid. But it also made me more open, more curious, and more willing to embrace the mysteries of the universe. Since that night, I've learned to be more mindful of the shadows, of the unseen forces that surround us. I've learned to appreciate the light, to cherish the moments of clarity and understanding, and to never take them for granted. The memory of that night, of the dark hand reaching through the frosted glass, is a reminder that there are things in this world that we cannot explain, things that lie beyond our understanding. It is a reminder that we are not alone, that we are part of something larger, something more mysterious and more powerful than we can ever imagine. It was late evening when I found myself in that room, the one with the creaky floorboards and the view of the dimly lit street outside. It wasn't my usual space, just an old guest room in a friend's house that I had agreed to stay in for the night. The room was sparsely furnished, with only a bed, a small nightstand, and an old wardrobe. The silence in the room was profound, almost oppressive. It was one of those quiet nights where the absence of sound is as disconcerting as the noise itself. As I stood by the window, trying to distract myself from the stillness, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. My eyes scanned the room, settling on the walls where shadows seemed to move oddly in the low light. I tried to ignore it, attributing the unsettling feeling to the fact that I was in an unfamiliar place. But as I lay down on the bed, the shadows grew more pronounced, elongating and stretching in ways that didn't match the angle of the light. It was almost as if the darkness itself was shifting, forming shapes that didn't quite make sense. My heart started to race. The air in the room felt dense, like it was pressing down on me. I sat up and switched on the lamp beside the bed, hoping the light would dispel the eerie sensation. Instead, the lamp cast long, distorted shadows that danced across the walls. I felt a chill, realizing that the shadows seemed to be moving on their own, as if they had a life of their own. I stood up and approached the wall, my curiosity getting the better of me. As I got closer, I saw that the shadows appeared to be forming dark, twisted shapes with elongated limbs and hollow, almost eye-like forms. They seemed to reach out toward me, their movements unnatural and unsettling. I blinked, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The shapes flickered and shifted, sometimes resembling vague, menacing figures. My pulse quickened as I tried to rationalize what was happening. I knew that light and shadow could play tricks on the mind, but this felt different. It wasn't just shadows moving, it was as if the darkness itself was alive and trying to interact with me. I backed away from the wall, my heart pounding. The sensation of being watched grew more intense. I felt as if I was in the presence of something that was both ancient and malevolent, though I had no tangible evidence to prove it. The shapes on the wall seemed to be reaching out, their motions synchronized with my own fear. Desperate to break the spell, I decided to call my friend who owned the house. As I dialed their number, I glanced around the room, half expecting to see something emerge from the shadows. My friend answered, and I explained what I was experiencing, trying to keep my voice steady. They laughed it off as a trick of the light and assured me it was probably just the old building's quirks. Still uneasy, I decided to investigate further. I searched the room for any source of the disturbing phenomena. The wardrobe, which stood against one wall, was old and creaky. I opened it, but it was empty except for some dusty hangers and a few forgotten garments. I examined the windows, the light fixtures, and even the carpet, but found nothing that could explain the shadows. As I was about to give up, I noticed something unusual about the old photograph on the nightstand. It was a faded black and white picture of a family standing in front of this very house. The image was blurry, but one figure caught my eye. In the background, partially obscured by the shadows, was a tall, thin figure with hollow eyes and an outstretched arm. The resemblance to the shadows I'd seen on the walls was uncanny. My breath caught in my throat. The photograph seemed to suggest that something had been here long before I arrived. I felt a wave of nausea and fear. The figure in the photo seemed to be reaching out from the past, trying to connect with the present. Unable to shake the feeling of dread, I decided to leave the room and sit in the living area downstairs, where I hoped I'd feel safer. The oppressive silence seemed to lift slightly as I moved away from the room. I sat there, trying to calm my racing heart, but the unsettling feeling of being watched lingered. Eventually, my friend returned home, and I shared my experience with them. They were skeptical but offered to check the room. As they examined the space, they didn't see anything unusual. They suggested that my mind might have been playing tricks on me due to the unfamiliar setting and stress. The next morning, I packed my things and left the house, relieved to be away from that room. I couldn't shake the sense of unease that had settled over me. The shadows, the photograph, and the feeling of being watched stayed with me long after I left. I never returned to that house, and I always wondered about the dark figure in the photograph. Was it a mere trick of the light, or had I glimpsed something that was trying to reach across time and space? The experience left me with an unsettling reminder of how thin the boundary between the known and the unknown can be. I had always been someone who prided myself on staying grounded. My life was predictable, my routines comforting. I liked it that way. My job as a project manager kept me busy, but it was manageable, and my evenings were spent in the tranquility of my apartment, a sanctuary from the chaos of the outside world. But everything changed after that dream. It began innocuously enough, like most dreams do, and I woke up with a vague sense of unease that I tried to shake off. It wasn't like me to dwell on nightmares, but this one was different. In the dream, I wandered through a maze of dimly lit rooms. The walls were covered in peeling paint, and the air was thick with an oppressive silence. Each room led to another, and though I tried to keep track, I felt as if I was going in circles. The sensation of being watched lingered, but when I turned around, there was nothing there, only darkness and the faint echo of my footsteps. The dream wasn't overtly frightening, but it left me with a gnawing sense of dread, a feeling that something was terribly wrong but I couldn't quite grasp what it was. I woke up with a start, my heart racing. The dream had left me unsettled, but I tried to dismiss it. Work had been overwhelming lately, with tight deadlines and endless meetings. Maybe it was the late nights and too much caffeine. I shook off the lingering sense of dread and got ready for the day. I told myself it was just a dream, a product of stress and fatigue. A few days later, as I was walking home from the office, I noticed a narrow alleyway I didn't remember ever seeing before. It was narrow, dark, and flanked by high, graffiti-covered walls that seemed to absorb the scant light from the street lamps. The alleyway had a peculiar draw, as though it was calling out to me. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to investigate, even though a small voice in my head warned me to turn back. The alley led to an old door, its paint chipped and faded. The door was barely hanging on its hinges, and the sight of it sent a shiver down my spine. I hesitated, but the pull was irresistible. I pushed the door open, and it creaked ominously as it revealed a staircase descending into darkness. My heart pounded, and my palms grew sweaty. I had no idea why I felt so compelled to explore, but I found myself unable to resist. The staircase was steep and narrow, and each step seemed to echo in the oppressive silence. When I reached the bottom, I found myself in a basement that was both eerily familiar and unsettling. The walls were bare, the floor cracked and uneven. Dust-covered furniture was scattered around, and cobwebs hung from the ceiling. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years. The sight of it filled me with a sense of déjà vu so intense that it nearly took my breath away. I wandered through the space, feeling a mounting sense of unease. The basement was laid out almost exactly like the rooms from my dream. The layout was confusing, with doors leading to more rooms that seemed to shift as I moved. My anxiety grew with each step. I tried to dismiss it as a trick of my mind, but the more I explored, the more convinced I became that this place was somehow connected to my nightmare. In one corner, I discovered a small room with a single, flickering light bulb hanging from the ceiling. Beneath it sat an old wooden chair, and on the chair was a book. The cover was worn and nearly illegible, but the sight of it sent a chill down my spine. I felt an inexplicable compulsion to pick it up. As I opened the book, I was confronted with pages filled with handwritten notes and strange diagrams. The entries detailed a series of events that mirrored the nightmare I had been having. It was as though someone had documented my dreams in this old, forgotten book. My hands trembled as I read. The entries described a growing sense of dread, much like what I had felt in the dream. They spoke of unsettling experiences and a deep, creeping fear. I couldn't ignore the feeling that this book was meant for me, that it was a record of my own fears and anxieties. I had to leave. The basement felt like it was closing in on me, and the tapping noise I had heard earlier seemed to grow louder and more insistent. It was as if the walls themselves were reacting to my presence. I hurried up the stairs, but the way back seemed to stretch endlessly. The familiar staircase seemed longer, the darkness more oppressive. When I finally emerged into the alley, everything looked different, darker, more menacing. The streetlights cast long shadows, and the once familiar neighborhood seemed alien. My heart raced as I stumbled home, desperately trying to shake off the eerie feeling. That night I couldn't sleep. The dream's unsettling elements began to seep into my waking life. I heard tapping noises in my apartment, noises that seemed to come from nowhere. I saw graffiti-like marks on my walls, and objects appeared that resembled items from the basement. My initial fear turned into paranoia. I started to see traces of the basement in every corner of my life. It was as though the nightmare had somehow bled into reality. I tried to talk to my friends and family, but they dismissed my concerns as stress-induced paranoia. "You're just overworked," they said. "It's nothing to worry about." But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I began to question my sanity. Each day felt like a replay of the dream, with new, disturbing elements woven into my reality. The sense of being trapped in a perpetual cycle of fear grew stronger. In a desperate attempt to confront whatever was happening, I returned to the basement. But to my horror, the door was gone. The alley had vanished, replaced by a blank wall where it had been. I searched frantically, but there was no trace of the basement. It was as if it had never existed. The realization was almost too much to bear. My nightmare had become my reality, and there was no escape. Days turned into weeks, and the sense of dread continued to grow. The lines between my dreams and reality blurred. I found myself trapped in a cycle of fear and confusion. The book from the basement had become a constant reminder of the nightmare that had overtaken my life. It lay on my nightstand, its pages filled with disturbing entries that seemed to describe my every waking moment. The final blow came when I discovered a new entry in the book. It described my current situation with chilling accuracy, ending with the line, "The dream never ends. It only begins anew." The realization that my nightmare was now my reality was almost too much to comprehend. My life had become a never-ending loop of terror, with no clear way out. I became increasingly isolated, unable to escape the cycle of fear that had consumed me. My once safe world now felt like a labyrinth of horror, with each day bringing new and unsettling experiences. It was a crisp autumn evening when I decided to visit Moonville Tunnel in Ohio. The place had always intrigued me with its dark history and the eerie tales that surrounded it. I had heard stories of ghostly figures and unsettling sounds, but nothing prepared me for what I experienced. As I approached the tunnel, the setting sun cast long shadows, turning the forest into a maze of dark silhouettes. The tunnel loomed ahead, its entrance a gaping maw in the hillside. I took a deep breath and stepped inside, the sound of my footsteps echoing off the cold, damp walls. The further I walked, the colder it became, and the oppressive darkness seemed to close in around me. A chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air snaked down my spine. The silence was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic tap-tap-tap of my own shoes against the uneven stone floor. It was a sound that seemed amplified in the confined space, each echo bouncing off the walls, multiplying the feeling of isolation. I felt a prickle of unease, the kind that comes with the awareness that you are not alone. Halfway through, I heard a faint, rhythmic thumping. At first, I thought it was my heart racing, but the sound grew louder and more distinct. It was like something, or someone, was following me, mimicking my steps. I stopped and listened intently, but the sound abruptly ceased. I took out my flashlight, the beam slicing through the darkness, revealing old graffiti and abandoned debris. There was nothing there. The silence, now heavier with a chilling awareness, felt suffocating. My breath fogged in the air, a ghostly, fleeting presence in the darkness. In that moment, I felt a primal fear, a sense of being watched, a presence that I couldn't quite grasp but could feel pressing in on me. My rational mind told me it was just my imagination, a trick played by the eerie atmosphere of the place. But my intuition screamed otherwise. The tunnel, once just a curiosity, now felt like a living entity, breathing in the stillness, waiting for me to break its spell. Suddenly, I felt a chill crawl up my spine as a cold breath seemed to pass over my neck. My flashlight flickered, and in that brief moment of darkness, I saw a shadowy figure dart past the entrance. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the overwhelming silence. I bolted out of the tunnel, my legs burning with an adrenaline-fueled sprint. My lungs screamed for air, my legs pumping, the rhythmic thumping still echoing in my ears. It was as if the darkness itself had chased me out, its icy touch still lingering on my skin. When I looked back, the tunnel stood silent, its secrets safely locked away in the dark. The gaping entrance seemed to mock me, the faint glow of the setting sun painting its facade in an unsettling, almost sinister, light. I stood there for a moment, my breath coming in ragged gasps, staring at the tunnel as if it held the answers to my fears. But it remained silent, a silent sentinel guarding its secrets, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to step into its darkness. The next few days were a blur, the incident at Moonville Tunnel etching itself onto my soul like a brand. The shadow of the figure, the cold breath, the rhythmic thumping, they haunted my dreams, replaying like a horror film on repeat. The air I breathed felt colder, the silence heavier, and shadows seemed to dance at the edge of my vision. I tried to rationalize the experience, to dismiss it as a figment of my imagination, a trick played by the dark and the unknown. But the fear lingered, a nagging doubt that something was amiss, something beyond the realm of human understanding. One evening, I found myself drawn back to the tunnel. It was a compulsion, a need to confront the fear that had become a constant companion. The forest was eerily silent, the setting sun casting long, skeletal shadows from the trees. The sight of the tunnel entrance sent a shiver down my spine, a reminder of the dread that had consumed me. As I stood before the entrance, I felt a strange sense of familiarity, like I had been here before, not just in the past few days, but in a time far more distant, a time I couldn't quite place. The air felt colder than it had been, and a gust of wind sent a shiver down my spine. Without a conscious decision, I stepped inside, the familiar chill and darkness engulfing me. I felt a sudden rush of unease, a sense of being watched, a feeling so intense it was almost tangible. It was as if the tunnel itself was aware of my presence, its silence crackling with anticipation. As I walked deeper, the rhythmic thumping from before started again, this time more pronounced, more urgent, like a heartbeat echoing in the darkness. My heart pounded in my chest, my breathing shallow and rapid, a primal fear taking hold. Suddenly, a cold, clammy hand gripped my shoulder. I whirled around, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, but it was too late. The figure was already gone, leaving behind a faint, sickly sweet scent that made my stomach churn. I stumbled back, my fear morphing into a gut-wrenching panic. I ran, my legs pumping, the rhythmic thumping becoming a horrifying symphony in the darkness. I didn't stop until I was out of the tunnel, gasping for breath, my body trembling with fear. As I stood there, catching my breath, I realized that I had not just been afraid of the dark, but of something else, something older, something hidden deep within the history of the tunnel, something that had been there long before me, something that had been waiting for me. I never returned to Moonville Tunnel. I never told anyone about my encounters, for fear of being dismissed as a fool, a dreamer, a victim of his own imagination. But the fear, the haunting sense that something was wrong, lingered. The shadow of the figure, the cold breath, the rhythmic thumping, they became a part of me, a permanent reminder of the darkness that lurks just beyond the realm of our understanding. The experience at Moonville Tunnel had changed me. It had chipped away at my sense of reality, leaving me with a lingering unease, a feeling of being watched, of being followed, of being hunted. It had opened a door in my mind, a door that I would never close, a door that allowed me to see the world in a new, more unsettling light. I knew then, with an unshakable certainty, that the dark secrets of Moonville Tunnel remained hidden, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to step into its darkness, waiting to whisper its secrets into the ears of the unwary, waiting to make them its own. And I knew, with an even greater certainty, that I would spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, forever haunted by the shadow of the tunnel, forever wondering what lurks in the darkness that waits just beyond the pale of our understanding. When I was 14, my family fell on hard times. We lost our home and ended up in emergency housing. It was a cramped, sterile place, filled with the hushed whispers of desperation and the scent of bleach and stale coffee. We turned to a local charity that helped us find a house we could rent for next to nothing, but it came with a catch: we could only stay there for 3 months. That summer, my mom and stepdad decided to separate for a while, a temporary truce in their ongoing war. My 3 younger siblings would take turns staying with him for a week or so, then come back to stay with my mom and me. The house we moved into was on Grove Street, in a quiet, almost forgotten neighborhood. It was a ramshackle Victorian, its once grand facade now crumbling under the weight of neglect. The paint was peeling, the porch creaked ominously, and the windows were boarded up, like blind eyes staring out into the world. It started with that prickling feeling you get, like something isn't quite right, like you're being watched even when you're alone. During the day, it was just this creeping sense of unease, like there was an invisible weight pressing down on the air. It wasn't the house itself, though it felt like a character in its own right. It was more like an unseen presence, a malevolence that clung to the air, filling every corner of the house with a silent dread. I tried to shrug it off, telling myself it was just the stress of our situation. But as soon as dust settled, the atmosphere would shift, and the real disturbances would begin. The first time I experienced a full-blown manifestation of this creeping horror, I was alone in the house, finishing up my homework at the kitchen table. It was a humid summer evening, the kind that hangs heavy in the air, suffocating you with the scent of damp earth and rotting leaves. The streetlights cast an orange glow through the grimy windows, the shadows stretching long across the worn linoleum floor. The silence was punctuated by the faint chatter of the neighbors, the distant rumble of a passing car, and the creak of the old house settling. Then I heard it. A faint, static-filled music, like someone tuning a radio, echoing through the halls. My heart lurched, the hair on my arms prickling. I froze, holding my breath, listening. The music seemed to be coming from somewhere inside the house, but it was impossible to pinpoint. It danced through the rooms, weaving through the cracks and crevices, like a phantom trying to find a way out. I got up, my footsteps echoing in the silence, and started to search. I checked each room, pausing at each door, listening intently. The music followed me, a haunting melody that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. I checked the attic, the basement, even under the floorboards, but the source remained elusive. It was like the very walls themselves were whispering, their silence broken by the ghostly music. The next few weeks were a blur of strange occurrences. My younger sisters, Lily and Rose, were staying with Mom that week. One evening, while I was in my room, I heard quiet murmurs coming from their room. I instinctively felt a chill crawl down my spine. Hesitantly, I pushed the door open, the hinges groaning in protest. The room was dark, the only light filtering in through a crack in the curtains. The air hung heavy with the scent of mildew and dust. Lily and Rose were both sleeping soundly in their single beds, their faces turned toward the wall. I was about to leave when my eyes caught something out of the corner of my eye. There, in the open closet, I saw a pair of eyes staring back at me. They were deep-set and black, like two bottomless pits, and they blinked slowly, as if acknowledging my presence. Then, as quickly as they appeared, they vanished into the darkness. I stood there, frozen in place, my heart pounding in my chest. It was as if a cold hand had reached out and squeezed my heart, leaving me breathless. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I had seen. Was it real? Or was I just imagining things? In that moment, I didn't know what to believe. But one thing was certain, the house was not what it seemed. My brother, Mark, came to stay with us for a few days the following week. He was older than me, just 17, and always had a skeptical streak. He scoffed at my stories about the music and the eyes in the closet. "It's just your imagination," he said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "You're just stressed." But even Mark couldn't deny the strange occurrences in the house. It was during his second night there. We were all asleep when we were awoken by a loud crash coming from downstairs. My brother, being the bravest of us all, grabbed a flashlight and went to investigate. He came back pale and shaken, his voice a strained whisper. He claimed he'd heard a heavy thud coming from the living room. But when he got there, the lights were still off, and the only thing out of place was a picture frame that had fallen off the mantel. I stayed up that night, unable to sleep. My mind was filled with images of the eyes in the closet, the static-filled music. I kept waiting for something to happen, but the night passed with only the creaking of the house and the rustling of the trees outside. The house seemed to pick at us, wearing us down with its unsettling atmosphere. Each day, it felt as if the darkness seeped a little further into our lives, wrapping itself around us like a suffocating blanket. Then, one night, a strange incident happened in my room. I was having trouble sleeping. The air felt heavy, thick with anticipation. I kept hearing whispers coming from the walls, faint and distorted, like the sound of voices from a distant dream. I noticed the old mirror on the wall across from the window. It was a large, ornate mirror, its silver tarnished with age. I had avoided looking at it, a feeling of unease crawling up my spine whenever I caught its reflection. But that night, I found myself staring at it, trying to find some meaning in its darkened depths. The moment I turned away, I saw it. Tall, dark shapes were moving outside the window, pacing back and forth as if searching for a way in. My heart pounded against my ribs, my breath catching in my throat. They were enormous figures, their forms shifting and blurring in the darkness. They moved with deliberate grace, their movements silent and fluid, like shadows dancing in the moonlight. I couldn't tear my eyes away, my body frozen in fear. I felt a primal dread, a deep, instinctual understanding that something was terribly wrong. The shapes paused, their eyes seeming to fix on me, and I felt an icy cold shoot down my spine. I threw myself back on the bed, burying my face in the pillow, unable to look away. The footsteps continued, their rhythm slowing, their pace unwavering, as if they were deliberately torturing me with their presence. The next morning, I tried to tell Mom what I saw, but even her calm, reassuring voice couldn't ease the terror that still gripped me. She thought I had imagined it, a byproduct of our stressful circumstances and the relentless fear that permeated the house. But Mom was facing her own share of the house's malevolence. She found herself drawn to a particular corner of her room, the one nearest to the window. There, she would see shadow figures, shifting and swirling in the darkness, never coming closer, never leaving. They moved in slow circles, as if performing a ritual, their movements punctuated by the faint whisper of voices, like a chorus chanting in a forgotten tongue. Mom, a devoutly religious woman, prayed for strength, for understanding. She clutched her Bible tight, seeking solace in its words. But even her faith couldn't explain the shadows, couldn't banish the fear that gripped her heart. We were all becoming victims of the house, consumed by its unsettling presence. It preyed on our vulnerabilities, amplifying our fears, twisting our perceptions. It was as if the house was feeding off our energy, our anxieties, our growing sense of despair. There was one final event that solidified our belief that the house was truly cursed. It was a night when a lunar eclipse was set to happen. I had never seen one before, and I was excited to watch it. But as the day progressed, a sense of dread began to creep over me, an inexplicable fear that I couldn't shake off. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the sky started to change, the colors morphing into shades of deep purple and blood orange. The stars twinkled with an eerie intensity, and the air grew thick with anticipation. I wanted to go outside, to watch the eclipse, but a powerful force kept me rooted to the spot. I couldn't explain it. I couldn't shake off this overwhelming sense of dread, a fear that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the house. It was as if the house itself was warning me to stay inside, to avoid the darkness outside. As the moon started to disappear into the shadow of the earth, I forced myself to step outside. The air was cold and damp, the trees swaying in the night breeze. I looked up at the sky, my eyes searching for the eclipsed moon. But as soon as I did, my head snapped down. I felt a surge of terror, a primal fear that froze my blood. My vision locked onto the trees on the left side of the yard, the ones that seemed to whisper secrets in the night. I saw 3 tall shadows moving among the pines, their forms shifting and blurring in the darkness. They moved with an unnatural grace, almost gliding between the trees, their movements fluid and silent. They were like the shadows I had seen in my room, only larger, more imposing. They seemed to be gathering, their shapes merging and separating, their movements fluid and deliberate. As I watched, a deep, primal fear gripped me, an instinctual dread that told me to run. I turned and sprinted back inside, diving under my blankets with my eyes squeezed shut. I could hear the slow, deliberate footsteps approaching, their rhythm a pounding drumbeat against my heart. They stopped outside my window, their presence heavy and oppressive. The footsteps continued for what seemed like an eternity, their relentless beat echoing in my ears. The house creaked and groaned, the shadows dancing in the moonlight, and I felt a growing sense of despair. The darkness was closing in, and I could feel the evil of the house seeping into my bones. We endured 3 months of this nightmare. Each day was a struggle, each night a torment. We felt like prisoners in our own home, trapped in a suffocating web of fear and dread. Then, finally, our 3 months were up. We packed our meager belongings and left that dreadful house on Grove Street. We moved to a new house, one that felt warm and welcoming, a sanctuary from the horrors of the past. My mom and stepdad reconciled, their differences fading in the face of our shared experience. My siblings and I were together again, our family unit strengthened by the ordeal. We all agreed that the house on Grove Street was wrong, deeply wrong. We tried to forget about it, to block out the memories of the strange occurrences, the chilling shadows, the haunting music.